All right, welcome everyone to the Flux Dev meeting. Today is Wednesday, the 21st of July. Just scanning the agenda. There's not much on. Let's see if we have action items from last time. No, not that I could see. Yeah, I have a quick update. So regarding graduation, we did a little bit of behind the scenes work. So I talked to the CNCF, who is going to pay for a security audit of Flux, which is great. They reached out to OSTIF, which is like an association that facilitates security things in the open source world, and they reach out to a bunch of security companies, and they're signing the statement of work with a company now, and they'll probably get started next week. So I'm going to reach out to the maintainers and see that we get like one or two of you together with that security company. I'm sure they're going to have a couple of questions where to get started and what to pay attention to. The whole process might take around like 4 weeks something, and then an additional couple of weeks to file the report and fine-tune things. And I don't know what the announcement process is going to be, but we'll find out. So something between 1 or 2 months, the whole exercise is going to take. And in the meantime, I think I should sit down and write and update the due diligence information, the application for graduation. So I think at the same time we can get our ducks in a row, and then once the security audit is fully done, we can put the application in. That was my quick update regarding graduation.
How different is the graduation kind of application to the incubation one, which we did recently, relatively recently?
As far as I can see, not very different. Like the big differentiators are the security story, the governance story, but and I think we're in a very lucky position that we organize these things much earlier. So we already had like a small like governance review in the meantime, and we figured out like, okay, it's working well. So I think, at least to me, being in the bubble, it seems to say like this is pretty mature. Like we're at a good spot with all these things. So I think for the application text, we need to update some of the numbers and just see like which part of our story we want to share with folks there. And I think that's all.
Cool.
Cool. Alison, do you want to say a couple of things about what's happening in the docs work, because you've been quite active there?
I haven't really talked that much about it, but yeah, we got that style guide merged in the other week, which is nice. Like, I think at the moment I've just been thinking a lot about what is kind of the way forward with I was commenting on issue earlier, Michael's issue earlier about like the content types, and so what is the way forward for docs and our project? And I think I've come up with like a brief kind of idea where, where we want to reinforce the foundations. And so we've done like part of that work, which is doing the style guide. Next, we'll be doing a guide on the different types, and then drafting out, a plan of what our ideal structure is, what things need to be broken out. And then from there, after we've reinforced foundations, it will be just improving / moving some of the walls around in the house. So yeah, because that's pretty much the idea that I had in my mind about these things. I don't know. Does anyone have any other thoughts or stuff they'd like to share about something?
That sounds pretty sensible to me. I think, the way our docs are arranged, they do actually more or less fall into those categories, but they're not. You know, the navigation doesn't make that clear, and it doesn't sort of serve those different purposes in the way that it could, if you see what I mean. So that type of content it's there. It's just not arranged in a way that makes it accessible. And that, you know, a user who comes to the doc site thinking, what I really need is to do this one really specific thing. You know, there's no obvious way to find where that is. You know, I need to set up ECR or something, scanning ECR. Or I just want to learn about how such and such a thing works. Can I step through a guide? I mean, there are some guides, but there's sort of a bit of a mix.
Like, yeah, because that's the thing. Like, we've got this kind of like big abstract kind of concept of a guide, and that guide can like vary in the content of, like, you know, the guides can have like a full-on explanation. Some of them have like a clear, this is what you're going to get out of it. Some of them don't, you know, some of them, like, it varies a lot. So having some more clearly like defined types will help us kind of help us direct our users to the information that they're trying to find, as well as I think with all these different types and these categories that we do have, there is kind of a bit of sprawl in areas. Like, for instance, like if the questions like, how do I do X with Helm and Flux? Like, there's many places where you can find that information. So I left this comment in that issue if you've had a read of it. But like, you can find, if you had a question like, how do I do this thing with Helm and Flux? You can look at the Helm release page and guides. You can look in use cases Helm. You can look inside the component documentation itself. So kind of breaking it out so that the reference documentation is just reference documentation, and the how to do a thing is just the how to do the thing, will make it easier as well for our users to just kind of find that information.
Yep, totally. And there's a particularly egregious example of this, which is there's reference docs that are generated. This gets me every single time when I go to look for, you know, a particular CRD. There's reference docs that are generated, and then there's a written guide, and those live right next to each other and are called really similar things. And so I always get the wrong one, or, you know, it's a toss-up whether I get the right one.
And then on top of that, with our API kind of reference documentation, we've got like it duplicates itself a bit because there's the giant table of everything, which is kind of like a one-pager, and then there's the like page for that individual thing. So for instance, you got component source Helm charts, and you got component source API, the link to the Helm chart object in there. So perhaps with that, you know, maybe we collate all the tables into a one pager for that release, and then keep the like individual Helm chart pages for kind of components and things. Do you get what I'm saying? So like, you know how Kubernetes has like a whole one pager for their API spec, and it's like this is everything you can do. We have one of those for Flux, but we also still have that. This is a source. This is all the source stuff. This is the page for Helm. I think they do that pretty much same thing.
Yeah, it's not super well kind of organized, that stuff. You have to flip around a lot. It would be a bit better if you could just jump between them. Cool. So you were looking at doing a plan for rearranging that. Is that right, Alison?
Yeah, I'm looking. Yeah, at the moment, before I do the plan, I want to get those types in just define, and then get the plan in, and then the plan will allow us to do things kind of like the bug scrub, but kind of like do doc sprint. Kind of, I could do a 1 or 2 day doc sprint where we get some contributors, volunteers on board. Yeah.
Got it. Right. So the first thing is to basically write as part of the style guide, maybe, or similar to it anyway. You know, here are the different types of documentation, and this is how you write about them. I see.
Yeah.
And then try and make the site actually conform.
Yeah. So we got that, and then we get the plan, and then with the plan we can make the shoes. Here you go. Have fun. The swimming pool's open. Yeah. It's actually really good that we have like everything written down and stuff. So I think it's just like a case of like, you know, editing and just moving some things about. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's enough. That's all from my. I don't want to drag on too long.
No worries. Thank you.
Super. Thanks a lot for your work on this. Yeah, and regarding the website, I've been working with, or yours has done most of the hard work. He's also on the call right now. Let me see if I can share this.
Hi there.
We recently landed a couple of things. Like one of them was this Flux facts section, or Flux in short. We tried to tell people at a glance what Flux does. And then a new thing we want to get on is this section. Is basically where we, we have some of the logos of the adopters in the background, and then in the front we'll have like some endorsements. And there's more we're going to put on, but it's basically what we've got so far.
That looks great. That was really good.
Yeah, lots of lots of logos.
Yeah, all the logos.
Yeah. All right. Did anyone have anything else? Keenan, you're doing a bug scrub tomorrow again, right? Is that right?
Yeah, it's at 1 p.m. Eastern. I wanted to make sure that I mentioned that, but also the GitOpsCon CFP deadline. I just wanted to make sure both of those things got a plug. The CFP deadline is July 25th, which is right around the corner. So if anyone is considering submitting, talk to the GitOpsCon KubeCon Day 0 event. Please get it in before then. And I wanted to mention or ask a question. I don't know if anyone knows the answer who's on the call, but just to put it out there. It's funny that you mentioned ECR and scanning ECR as an example, because that one came up in the Slack recently or in GitHub, I'm not sure which. I'm not sure it's covered by the docs, and I'm not sure it's even possible to cover because the question was about scanning a public ECR. And the question was in context of Flux 1. So if it's not supported now, I'm sure it won't be supported. After looking around the docs for ECR, it looks like ECR doesn't actually implement the tag index in the standard way. They have their own AWS API for pulling a list of tags. Which you have to be IAM permitted for. And I'm not sure if that's also true for public ECRs, but it seems to be because people are getting an error like 404 from their image scanners. And I couldn't get it. It was like pulling teeth to find out whether, is this a new problem? Have you been using this in the past, or did you just add this image to your cluster?
Must be a new problem. I mean, we've always used the standard distribution API for all image registries. So
I don't think public
ECR
ECR
certainly worked in the past. I don't know what's changed.
I think a public ECR registry is an anomaly, and I think there's only a few projects. I've only seen it once before, and it was a problem then too. So,
it's a separate thing.
It's an AWS API. They don't use the full.
Right, but what I mean is it's a distinct thing from having like your project ECR registry.
Right, the private
the
default state of an ECR registry is a private repo that you have to have IAM role and permissions to pull or push from.
Yeah.
But if you set up a public ECR, my understanding is the way to list tags is entirely through an AWS API that's documented, and it's list tags for image or something like that.
So right, so they've basically disabled a part of their API for the public ones. Weird. Okay.
So I wanted to bring it up because I'm sure that it will come up in the context of Flux 2 if it hasn't already.
Sure. Yep. Okay. Cool. Thanks for bringing that up. I would have had no clue about that otherwise. So very useful.
Yeah, I only was able to trace it down because I think I've seen it before, and it was a bugger to figure out then too.
Yeah, that's good. Kids, don't disable part of your APIs. Especially not if it's a standard.
One from AWS on one of these calls soon, and we can ask them why they did that.
Yeah, maybe. Hopefully, cross fingers. On the image automation front, last week I spent some time working on bugs, but nothing especially to report. I just fixed one or two and moved some others on. Yeah, it does look like V1 Beta 1 is basically okay. As we did a few weeks ago now, release the controllers with V1 Beta 1. And I think I've reported before, but I'll say it again, the problems that have come up are not about V1 Beta 1 so much as they're about things like using libgit2 and other limitations that we're discovering with that.
On the image automation front also, I have another question. It's come up in a couple of discussions, and it's a commonly understood thing, I think, at this point, that there are no cross namespace secret references, and that's been an obstacle for people. And I have a couple of issues and PRs open to track documentation improvements around that. But I wanted to ask, do we foresee that may change in the future when the model changes from service account to
users?
Yeah.
It's less about that, I think. That is part and parcel with some other parts, like implementing impersonation of users.
I know it's technically possible with a service account that has a cluster role binding to read secrets from any namespace, but we don't support it, and I'm sure that that is on purpose.
Well,
or maybe
that's not quite it. So what people want is usually some formulation of I want to have the details of access to the Git repository, and then the definition of the automation in different namespaces, or some variation, because there's 3 or 4 different types of thing. And so you get this sort of chain of logic, which is my secret that has the key for the Git repository is in Flux system, say, and I want to keep it there, but I want users to be able to define automations for their own namespaces. So kind of whether or not you think that's sensible, and opinions differ, that means that you somehow have to have some way of referring to indirectly to that secret, or being able to get access to the Git repository from where the automation is in another namespace. Or another variation is the automation can live where the access credential is, but all the sort of policies and definitions of image repositories and stuff should live in the tenant, so user namespace, with where the app is, right? Which is, these are reasonable requests. But either way, you need to kind of refer across namespace, and that is just sort of not the Kubernetes way. So I've resisted although it's available, it's just sort of sprinkled around the GitOps Toolkit APIs elsewhere. I personally don't think it's a good idea because you're essentially bypassing RBAC. So with the other GitOps controllers, that is to some extent mitigated because the things that use the cross namespace references can be operating in with a different user principle, like a service account or a service account at present, which means that you can at least limit what they can see in theory with RBAC. But the default is, I think the current implementation doesn't respect RBAC. It just uses the controller's account to look up secrets. And the default at present is to just run under the controller's service account. So if your user doesn't mention a service account, it just gets full permissions, or as many permissions as the controller has. So by default, basically every secret is available to anyone or every Git repository is available to anyone that cares to refer to it. And so I didn't want that as the default situation with automation, especially because it updates Git repos, right? So you don't want anyone to be able to update your Git repo that you just happen to have a definition of somewhere hanging around. So I had been waiting for a model in which the default is not to make everything available, basically. And there's two parts to that. One is requiring impersonation. So the default being to impersonate an account with no permissions, rather than the default being to impersonate, to use the controller account, which has permissions for everything. But secondly, possibly a better model of sort of granting permission to access something. So being able to say from the Git repository, say, I grant this namespace access to use this Git repository, which would be in addition to RBAC, sort of a layer above it, if you like.
So I guess why I brought this up is because it seems to me that if you're using the multi-tenancy the way that it's currently designed, and you have a service account that's in the namespace, then service accounts are namespaced, and it wouldn't make sense for them to be able to reach across namespaces unless you gave them a cluster role binding, which I don't think we would recommend, unless I'm not exactly sure I'm saying the right thing here. An unrestricted cluster role binding, one that can reach into other namespaces. But the user that is not a Kubernetes primitive and doesn't live inside of a namespace wouldn't necessarily have this limitation. And I don't know if that's correct at all, or if I don't want to give people, so I have mostly refrained from making any opinions statements about it because I don't want to mislead people. But it occurred to me that this might change when that new multi-tenancy model arrives.
Yes, although that does entail implementing impersonation in the automation controller, which just seems odd, personally, but maybe that's how it has to be done. I'm not sure. It seems kind of better to me to not include that, because just because, like, if you're sort of acting on behalf of the user, doing something into the cluster, like the customized controller does, then it makes sense to say, oh, you're doing something on behalf of, the person that created this object, and therefore it makes sense to sort of impersonate them, to act on their behalf by adopting a user principle, But the same is not true of the image automation. You're not really doing something in the cluster on behalf of a user in quite the same way. You're acting on the Git repo, so impersonation doesn't quite make sense there. But that's just my hand-wavy opinion on that. And that's the reason I don't like impersonation as the only solution to this, because you're only doing it because it's entailed by the model you've adopted, but it doesn't make any sense otherwise. Anyway, so the answer to your question about could it appear is, yeah, maybe. I think, there are reasonable use cases that sort of require something like this. So something like this would be great to develop. I've summarized various options in the issue that you linked to, I think, Kingdon. Hash 85, I think it is.
This one, I think you mean. I'll add it to the notes here.
Thank you. Yes, specifically this comment.
Super. Was there anything else anyone was hoping to discuss today? In that case, I think we can wrap up a little early. Cathy online. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.